rules. So first of all, please be aware that we are recording and this webinar will be available on our websites after the event. And please also mute yourself as you join so that our attention can be on the speakers. So this webinar titled Security Sector Reforms and COVID-19, Why Anti-Corruption Matters More Than Ever, aims at discussing a very important topic and a current topic that we would like to discuss with the audience. If CISLAC, colleagues at CISLAC are already sharing the agenda, which you can now see on your screen. And what we would like to discuss today with our speakers and with the audience is the linkages between the deployment of security sector actors during the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of their integrity, and the importance of reforming and incorporating anti-corruption provision in security sector reform. We will hear from our speakers and we will then open the conversation to the floor, and we hope to have a lot of input from the audience. So please do post your questions and your comments on the Zoom chat functionality. We would like you particularly to focus on some specific themes, and the themes that we would like to bring to your attention and we would like your input on is how can security sector reform continue during and after this pandemic? What will be their challenges, priorities, and opportunities? And finally, which role will anti-corruption play in this process of reforming? We will post these questions on the Zoom chat so that you can have them in front of you and you can reflect on them as we progress with our webinar. So I will now guide you through the first part of this event, and I will introduce you to our speakers. And then my colleague, Mr. Salahuddin Hashim from CISLAC will guide the open discussion. We would like to commence with some opening remarks from our Musa Rafsanjani, CISLAC Executive Director, and Natalie Hogg, Transparency International Defense and Security Director. So Mr. Rafsanjani, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much and good afternoon to all of you. Let me first acknowledge all the participants and in particular our partners for making this event a reality. As we all know, security sector reforms is both political and technical process of improving state and human security by making security provisions, management and oversight more effective and efficient in a more accountable within the framework of democratic civilian control, rule of law, and respect for human rights. The goal of SSR is to apply the principles of good governance to the security sector. Unfortunately, over the lockdown in Nigeria, this narrative was completely negated and bypassed and abused. Therefore, permit me to also indicate that reforms concern all the state and non-state actors involved in the security provision, management, and oversight, and emphasis, of course, is on the link between the roles and responsibility and action. The whole process also involves aspects of justice provision, management, and oversight, because security and justice are closely related. So, during the lockdown, most people were killed and citizens become victims, and the history would definitely not overlook this situation. And therefore, the overzealousness of some security actors, whereby they were brutalizing and killing innocent, Nigerians, is something that will continue to resonate in us. at the heart of this discussion is the use of public resources in the security sector, which need to be more efficient. And inefficient security sector wastes public resources, diverting funding from other essential public services and potentially burden the state with unnecessary debt. It is, this that we find very important to stress the emergency occurred by the COVID-19, which made it practically impossible to develop a national response strategy to deal with the situation. And this practically took away several accountability components and opened the door or the floodgates that lead to a lot of violation. The absence of response infrastructure actually led to the death of several citizens in an attempt to impose the lockdown protocol.
I believe we have a connection issue. Natalie, can I pass it over to you and Mr. Rafsanjani when you come back online? If you can, please let us know and we will let you speak again.
Thank you, Camilla. I hope you can all hear me well. I'm sitting in a very wet Yorkshire, but thank you for joining us to discuss this topic today. Thank you also to CISLAC for their work in organising the event, and I hope there's more to follow. I just want to give a really brief introduction to Transparency International's Defence and Security Programme. It's a global body of work that seeks to promote accountability and integrity in the defence sector worldwide. And we do this really through our research outputs, such as the Government Defence Integrity Index, which sets out some norms around how defence sectors can be governed. We work closely with our partners across Transparency International, such as CISLAC, to promote transparency and integrity and anti-corruption in the defence sector at a national level. And CISLAC is one of our main partners in doing that. And we also work at a regional and global level to promote norms and standards for defence governance. Obviously, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on a lot of different aspects of public life across the world. And quite rightly, the main focus has been on the health sector as the principal actor responding to the pandemic. But we've also seen worldwide the defence and security sector play a key role in the response, with the military being deployed in various different ways to either in response to the pandemic and the lockdowns or in the pandemic response itself. So we believe it's crucial that now, just as much as ever, there's a focus on the defence and security sector, and to ensure that its use in this situation is still guided by principles of transparency and accountability, and in a way that fosters trust in these institutions that are so vital at the time of crisis. A key theme of the defence and security programme's work is promoting integrity and anti-corruption in security sector reform processes. And indeed, CISLAC also has a great deal of experience promoting transparency and accountability with armed forces at a national level. And so we're very keen to promote the sense that it's crucial now more than ever that security sector reform processes that continue in the time of a global pandemic consider integrity as part of their core mandate. And we're hoping that this webinar will be a really good opportunity to start and widen this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to hearing participants' views on the topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. That was really good. That was really good to hear. And Mr. Rafsanjani is back, so I'd like to let him finish his remarks. But before that, can I please ask participants to turn off their cameras. It may help with connection. So Mr. Rafsanjani, over to you, please.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I don't know where you had me last, but let me quickly just say this, that to say that permit me to also indicate that reforms concern all state and non-state actors involved in the security provision, management, and oversight. And the emphasis, the link between their roles, responsibilities, and action. The whole process also involves aspects of justice provision, management, and oversight, because security and justice are closely related. Over the lockdown, most people were killed. A lot of people were killed, in Nigeria, and this has really, thrown a lot of trust deficit, between the state and non-state, actors. There is no gainsaying that security sector, which is not effective, cannot deliver security. While the security sector that is not accountable and endanger both the population and the state. A security sector that is ineffective and unaccountable causes a number of problems. And I believe that this meeting can help remedy this in future. At the heart of this conversation is the use of public resources in the security sector, which need to be more efficient. An efficient security sector wastes public resources, diverting funds from other sources, incurring unnecessary debts in the country. It is important to stress that the emergency occasioned by the COVID-19, which made it practically impossible to develop a national response strategy to deal with this situation, and this practically took away several accountability components and opened the floodgate violation. Ladies and gentlemen, the absence of response infrastructure actually led to the deaths of several Nigerians in an attempt to enforce the so-called lockdown protocols. Over 70 people were killed in Nigeria by security operatives, and a lot of Nigerians have been also brutalized as a result of this enforcement of the lockdown. And to also say that a lot of diversion of public funds in the names of the palliative had also occurred, which means that it is important that we demand security sector reform in order to deal with this situation and even future situations like this. That I think it is important that we take necessary steps, and I believe this kind of conversation will help provide clear roadmap that can help ensure and demand accountability in the security sector and reform. So without taking much of your time, let me just emphasize that the need for security sector reform, it is non-negotiable. It is important given the deteriorating security situation in the country. A lot of breaches in the procurement in the security sector are still happening, and we need to ensure that we carry out a reform that will ensure and compel accountability in the use of public funds for security sector. So this is why I think this very important conversation today is going to help to provide clear roadmap that can help assist not only Nigeria but also other countries in terms of strengthening our security sector and our defense procurement sector, in Africa and many other places where we have similar problems. So I want to, on behalf of both colleagues, thank you for also participating in this very important meeting, and I hope that we will continue to exchange views that can help improve security sector in our various countries. And in particular, let me also thank Camilla for actually providing the necessary support to ensure that we hold this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafsanjani. It was very good to hear some background to this webinar, and thank you obviously to all colleagues at the IDS and CISLAC for this event. So let us start with the first speaker of this event, Mr. Julien Joly from Transparency International Defense and Security. Julien will talk to us about the linkages in between anti-corruption and security sector reform. Julien, over to you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Yeah, sorry for the video, but just let's focus on the presentation. I would like to start by emphasizing that although COVID-19 is a public health crisis, it has critical impact in terms of security governance. All over the world, we've seen countries that have declared a state of emergency, and the security sector actors have been playing a significant role in implementing COVID-19 response. And sometimes even outside the remit of their initial mandates. And this brings us to further reflect on the role of the security sector in society and on the way it is governed. For instance, a study recently published by DCAF analyzes the emerging practices and trends related to the COVID-19 response in 66 states. And according to this study, there is no evidence that emergency measures or COVID-19 specific legislations have allowed for better checks and balances. In fact, it underscores that although these measures vary from one country to another, most of them have been introduced strict limitations on the exercise of fundamental rights. In addition, the study suggests that many of these measures could lead to abuses by security sector actors, and especially in countries characterized by rampant inequalities and socioeconomic instability. Now, on the other hand, we know that defense security corruption, and I encourage you to read a TIDS publication called The Fifth Column, tends to increase inequalities and erode public trust. In fragile contexts where corruption risks in the security sector are high, the involvement of security sector actors in the COVID-19 response could potentially exacerbate pre-existing tensions and fuel social unrest. And that is especially true in countries where we've seen already regimes using the cover of the COVID-19 to implement more repressive measures. So as my colleagues previously said, in a context like the COVID-19 crisis, improving security governance and building both accountability and integrity is essential to harness the capacity of security sector actors to implement the COVID-19 response within the framework of human rights and the rule of law. And this is where security sector reform is more relevant than ever. Now let's briefly look at the role of security actors in the COVID-19 response. If you can just move on to the next slide, please. So all over the world, security actors have been playing a significant role in the COVID-19 response. They have been providing assistance to civilian authorities. That includes the military to supplement civil healthcare with field hospital, but also with transport and logistical support. We've seen internal security forces such as the gendarmerie, National Guards and civil protection units that have been playing a role in crowd control, but also in enforcing quarantine measures and curfews. The police also has often been tasked with ensuring that people follow social distancing and other government recommendations. And overall, security forces have been providing important services in managing the COVID-19 response. But in many countries, and especially in fragile contexts, they were not necessarily well prepared nor trained for this, and many have been responding in an ad hoc fashion. Because to be successful in those tasks, defense security forces need to be equipped with proper governance mechanism. Otherwise, there are risks to waste public resources, but also risk to antagonize civilian populations by failing to deliver efficient services and by adopting harmful behavior towards civilian populations. So formal security actors can be very helpful in assisting public health services, yes, and this role must be recognized. But at the same time, there is a need to ensure that these interventions are conducted within the framework of human rights and the rule of law. And more importantly, in fragile environments, there is a need to ensure that these interventions don't fuel insecurity and don't contribute to instability. because it is also important to keep in mind that in emergency situations such as the COVID-19 crisis, additional impediments to civilian oversight tend to arise, and especially in fragile contexts. Can move on to the next slide, please. Thanks. So usually these impediments relate to less transparency, and as we've seen so far with the COVID-19, a wide range of measures introduced have affected civic space by limiting freedom of press, but also freedom of expression, freedom of movements, and in few instances, such as in Niger or DRC, journalists have been reportedly harassed by security forces in relation to their coverage of government response to the COVID-19 epidemics. There's also that institutions tend to not prioritize accountability of public officials, where accountability mechanisms are already weak to begin with. There are higher risks in terms of abuse of authority by security actors. And another example, when there's no procurement provisions in emergency, there are higher risks of diversion of public resources. And last but not least, there's also tends towards increase of opportunistic unethical conducts and behaviors, and especially in the public sectors, where previous major crises revealed that they tend to see an increase in human rights abuses. But ultimately, these impediments tend to significantly increase corruption risks, and in particular in the security sector, which in turn increases the risk of creating instability, because corruption and instability are profoundly intertwined. Next slide, please. Thanks. Just a quick overview to say that quantitative studies have indicated that corruption is positively correlated with state instability. For instance, evidence suggests that states dominated by narrow patronage systems are most susceptible to instability. And corruption not only follows conflict, but it also frequently is one of the root causes of armed violence. And broadly speaking, corruption fuels conflicts in two ways: by generating popular grievances and by diminishing the effectiveness and the legitimacy of national institutions. And just as conflicts are riddled with corruption, stabilization and peace-building efforts should be riddled with anti-corruption. And this is where the intersection between anti-corruption and SSR is critical, because with the aim of applying the principle of good governance to the security sector to ensure that security forces are effective and accountable, security sector reform lends itself ideally to a sustained focus on addressing corruption in the security sector. However, in practice, it is interesting to note that anti-corruption often doesn't seem to be receiving sufficient attention. For instance, when you look at security sector reform normative frameworks, such as the one developed by the UN or the one developed by the EU, you can see that corruption is too often mentioned superficially. And when it comes to designing SSR strategies and programs, it is largely marginalized by the centrality and financial importance of train and equip. Nevertheless, despite this persistent focus on training and equip, the international community recognizes that building integrity and accountability in this security sector is essential, because it helps to create public trust. And this trust is even more important in the context of COVID-19 response, when governments and in particular security sector actors are bound to play a major role in implementing the COVID-19 response. And now I would like to just use the example to illustrate my point. If we can just move on the next slide, please. Or next one. Thanks. So Transparency International Defense Security will soon publish a piece of research that analyzes the place that has been given to anti-corruption in security sector reform in West Africa. And it also explores how a greater focus on anti-corruption can actually harness the capacity of security sector reform to produce transformative change. Because in West Africa, evidence suggests that corruption often fuels conflicts and has deeply corrosive effect on trust in governments. And yet, building on the Defense Government Integrity Index, on the sample of West African countries that have been undertaking SSR, our research reveals that despite ongoing security sector reform programs, major corruption risks remain in the sector. So first, our research underlines a persistent lack of transparency and poor access to information across the region, but also oversight, particularly in the defense sector, tends to be limited in West Africa, with a clear gap between legislative provisions and the practical reality. So overall in the region, Parliament's control of the sector is enshrined in constitutions, but however, the actual powers tend to be limited by a number of factors, and that includes lack of technical expertise amongst parliamentarians, but also lack of resources, sometimes lack of access to information, and even in some instances, the influence of the executive. Now, our study also suggests that in many instances, there appears to be no formal process for defining procurement requirements, and this because there is either no clear security strategy or because the strategy is so shrouded in secrecy that assessing whether requirements derive from it is just impossible. Also, non-meritocratic rationales in recruitments and lack of transparency around personal numbers are recurring issues in the region. For instance, in many instances, public information on the numbers of civilian and uniformed personnel is lacking, and it tends to increase the opportunities for corruption. And overall, the risk of ghost soldiers in the region is considered relatively high. And last but not least, security institutions in the region rarely have a meaningful policy of openness towards civil society, and especially when it comes to dealing with issues of corruption. And this tends to create some disconnect between security apparatus and civil society, and also limits democratic oversight. And the threat here is that these disconnects breeds mistrust and suspicion between citizens on one side and the security sector on the other. So not only these findings suggest that anti-corruption is marginalized in those security sector reform processes, but it also underscores that the sector is not properly equipped to face the challenges inherent to implementing the COVID-19 response. And as a result, this exacerbates the risks of misuse of public resources, but also human rights abuses perpetrated by the security sector. And this could lead in turn to further erosion of the public trust and potentially reinforce the legitimacy of non-state groups that in some instances offer an alternative to state security services. So just to conclude, I would say that as security sector are bound to play a major role in implementing this COVID-19 response, there is a risk to further erode the public trust. But on the other hand, there is also an opportunity to restore the social contract by harnessing the capacity of security sector actors to perform their duty effectively and within the framework of the rule of law, human rights, and democratic oversight. And in this regard, the COVID-19 response needs to be tied to security sector reform efforts with a specific focus on building accountability, integrity, and addressing corruption. So all in all, that's what I have to say, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julian, and thank you for your insight in the triangulation between anti-corruption, security sector reform, and COVID-19. Now let's move to our next speaker, Mr. Ernest Ansallarchi, the head of Peace and Security Program at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Accra, Ghana. Mr. Larchi will give us his insight on which lessons can be drawn from the involvement of security sector actors in the Ebola crisis and which similarities and differences there are in between the Ebola crisis and the current COVID-19 outbreak. So Mr. Larche, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. And here we're still in the morning, so good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this meeting. I, to a large extent, would premise my presentation on the fact that the two countries I'm going to look at have experienced conflict. So this is a typical post-conflict security sector reform process, which presents its own challenges and opportunities, pretty much different from countries that are having transition from, say, dictatorship or autocratic regime to democracy and all that. But I think in all, in both cases, we are still looking at the definition that has been given by Mr. Awar in his introductory remarks, that basically says that SSR is actually reorienting the security forces in order to make them effective, efficient, accountable, and transparent. And so this particular seminar for me is very important, especially in the context of crisis management. And it is not a typical political crisis we are talking about, but this is a health pandemic or epidemic in the case of Liberia and Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis. So that is why I would like to situate this particular presentation. And I would say that there are a lot of similarities that one can draw from this post-conflict SSR and also disaster management processes and what is going on in the world regarding COVID-19. And so, to a large extent, I also agree with Julie with some of the empirical statistics that he had given in his presentation in that particular research that they had conducted. So let me say that. So yes, so if we try to look at making the security, and here I try to draw the distinction between security sector reform, SSR, and security sector governance, SSG. It plays out perfectly within West Africa, and again within Sierra Leone and Liberia, where you can really see the difference. Because in ECOWAS, the ECOWAS SSR policy framework has gone through some processes, but you would want to believe that we have had some controversy as to what we should call this policy document, SSR. And so it has gone through many processes. It started as security sector reform. Politically, it was not agreed by some of the countries, especially the Francophone countries, because if you look at Senegal, for instance, it had never had a military coup before. So when you say they should reform the security sector, which is geared towards making sure that the security sector become more professional and have this democratic control, then it is not too linked to them in terms of the reform process of operational strengthening. But there was a case that was made that even if you have not experienced conflict, you've not experienced military coup, you still needed to provide integrity strengthening in your security institutions. And so the operational strengthening looks at the effectiveness and then the efficiency of the security sector. And then the integrity strengthening looks at the making the security sector accountable and transparent. So it applies. And therefore, the term in West Africa is actually security sector governance reform. Security sector governance. So it is the reform of the security sector that is being governed to make sure that there's accountability and transparency. Now, what I want to say is that for both Sierra Leone and Liberia, you were looking at strengthening in terms, operational strengthening in terms of the right size of the armed forces, because here it's a post-conflict situation, and you are looking at how you actually bring the two forces together. So the rebel forces and then the government fighting forces. Now you want to build a new security force, and part of the peace agreement, usually in the provisions, you will notice that there's concession in there that we would merge these forces. And so it happened in Sierra Leone, where elements or units from the regular government force fighting forces were merged with the rebel fighting forces. In Sierra Leone, similar thing was done, but everything was disbanded, and so people will have to now go through the recruitment process as if they have not gone through the system before. And with that, there were checks on their human rights records and all that. So that is clearly a distinction. But these two countries also, with their SSR process or the security sector governance process, was externally driven to the extent that it was the US government that actually supported the armed forces reform in Liberia. And then in Sierra Leone, similarly, you have the British government that actually led the process of reforming the armed forces, including the national intelligence agencies. So the kind of endogenous reform process that you see probably in South Africa and a few other countries was not the case in West Africa, especially if you are looking at these two countries. Let me touch on one very important element of the reform process, and that would allow me to have a link with this Ebola crisis. In the reform process, there was this attempt to initially make it a whole of the security sector process. So the reform was looking tentatively at the armed forces, the police, and then maybe the prison service. And as Mr. Awar rightly said, the justice sector was largely overlooked. So you can have a police force that was very effective in conducting arrests with many of the armed robbery cases that was going on. But they are supposed to hand over or prosecute these people at the court, and then there were no court, there were no magistrates. So the focus became strengthening the court. So they trained the magistrate, they trained they built many courts. Now there were successful prosecutions, but then there were no prisons. So where do you put these people? So then we began to see the integrated nature of this. But that was also to a large extent trying to strengthen the criminal justice system, and that basically that was it. And then there was an attempt to make it a whole of government approach. And the whole of government approach was very important because of how it played out in managing the Ebola crisis, because at the time you needed, because of the scarcity of resources, especially as the health facilities and the health service sector had been run down, you needed to mobilize resources from the other sectors to be able to combat Ebola. And so the whole of government approach became very useful in how they managed the Ebola crisis in these two countries. Now, so you have the health sector, the security sector, the education sector, and everybody came on board to support this process. But that was not enough, because if you are looking at a whole of government, then you are looking at only reforming at the institutional level. You need to bring into the conversation the community, the society, the people. And therefore, we started seeing the whole of society approach to the security sector reform, even though it came later, but it played out pretty much during the management of the Ebola crisis, and I will touch on that. So if you look at the architecture, the new security sector architecture, you have the national, also for Sierra Leone, you have the Office of National Security, and then when you come to the provincial level, you have the provincial security councils, and then down there you have the district security councils, and then further down at the community level, you have the chiefdom security councils. And that is how the whole thing was structured. Prior to the reform, these structures were not there, and it was highly centralized. So the conflict helped in bringing about this whole of society approach towards security sector reform, going beyond just the security sectors and then the government institutions and involving the community. So similar thing was done in Liberia. And you could, if I show you the structure, you will see that, and I think that because both countries share this, borders and they are within the same Mano River region, they were able to learn lessons from each other, including also learning from countries like Ghana, like Nigeria, and a few others, to be able to have this kind of hybrid security sector structure. Now, let me jump quickly to what happened after this SSR process. First of all, they were able to prevent conflict relapse. So to a large extent, we have not seen these countries relapsing to conflict. Then again, they were able to manage political transitions. And so we have seen government go and government come in. And to a large extent, you see the security sector has played significant role because of the reform. The third issue I want to mention is that most of these two countries had peacekeeping missions supporting security operations. And so when the peacekeeping withdrew their presence, security management was handed to the national security forces. And that kind of transition was very important to manage the kind of democratic processes that those two countries were going through. The fourth is also about election. And here in West Africa, each time we are having elections, you see violence and many other things. And through this reform process, these two countries have evolved a mechanism in which usually during election years, they form this National Election Security Task Force, embracing most of these agencies and then some of the civil society groups to be able to manage electoral violence and all that. So we've not seen situations where elections have created conflict in these countries, even though there are some difficulties sometimes in terms of violence and all that. The other key thing I want to mention is how we manage pandemics. And we saw how Liberia and Sierra Leone managed the epidemic situation of Ebola. And the security forces were used extensively in managing the process. But especially for Sierra Leone, it was critical because when the mudslide occurred, which was also a major disaster that killed a lot of people, it was this decentralized city able to contain the situation in Sierra Leone. Now, let me come to the role of the security sector in managing the Ebola crisis. And most of these things, we are seeing them also played out in countries like Ghana and all that, managing this COVID-19 situation. And I will say that the security agencies were deployed to play preventive role. Preventive role in the sense that it was to prevent the escalation of the spread of the disease. And so security forces, especially the armed forces, were deployed to the quarantine communities and facilities to enforce restrictions on movement and all that. The second point has to do with how they were deployed to border areas to also enforce movement across the border. And I would like to bring in Guinea because in the Mano River Union, the whole epidemic or the whole pandemic of the Ebola crisis was actually centered in these three countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. And at some point in time, in the Mano River Union, they have this protocol that says that there should be free movement of people across the union. However, because of the way the way they were not communicating and exchanging information, some of the countries actually imposed border restrictions without informing the other. It also created some kind of challenges, especially between Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire. Let me say further that deployment was also done in communities to enforce curfew. And you know that as soon as a situation is declared as public health emergency, it triggers a lot of actions, emergency actions. So for instance, the president, who is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and all, would use the constitution to enforce maybe emergency, imposition of emergency rules and all that, including curfews and all that. And those powers are usually drawn from the constitution. But the second key thing has to do with the fact that they usually would issue specific executive instruments. And these executive instruments usually should not only be done by the executive, but it must come to Parliament for Parliament to scrutinize and then to adopt, for it to become part of the legislation. And that is what we are also seeing in the management of COVID-19 across the region. So these were some of the measures that were taken in these countries. But the downside, in fact, we have not had the role of the intelligence services, but the armed forces and the police played a very key role, especially even for the prison services, because initially for Liberia, for instance, detention for one crime, for committing one crime or the other, who have not been prosecuted successfully, were being put in the same prison facility. And some of them, because they have contracted the disease, were going to infect people in the prisons. And later on, the prison service was able to do this separation where they kept detainees different from those who have been incarcerated. But the intelligence services, especially in Liberia and Sierra Leone, played a very important role in contact tracing, which I'm not hearing so much in this COVID-19 situation. And so they were able to go to the border communities and generate information, and also to trace those people who have come into contact with people who have been infected with the disease. And it was a very useful exercise, seeing the intelligence agencies play a human security role in this particular regard. The downside.
Mr. Marty, apologies to interrupt you, but if you could please wrap up so we can proceed with the speakers.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
So the downside, and I think most of these things have been highlighted, initially, when you deploy the military, you know they move with their weapons. And so we saw the use of firearms in dispersing crowd in Liberia, especially the case that happened in West Point, for instance, where somebody lost their life and then a lot of injury situations were recorded. Then command and control operations became very problematic, especially in Sierra Leone. Who is to play which role? Who is to lead in this process? Initially, there was confusion, but later, with the establishment of the National Ebola Crisis Center, which was hosted at the Office of the Vice President, became a coordinating body for the management of Ebola. And that is what we are also seeing in most of these COVID-19 cases. Let me say that most of the security personnel did not have protective gear to be able to do the kind of work that they were doing. And so they were also very vulnerable to the situation. Some of them were actually infected with the disease. Let me say that even though the community was involved, the structure has it that the community, there's a whole of community approach. But again, in the border communities, something different happened because the way the military was deployed in those areas created some kind of tension between the community and then the people. In fact, they were seen as the ones who were aiding people to cross the border from the different countries, and that created some kind of friction between the community and the security agencies. So these are my preliminary remarks, and I think as we go ahead, we'll be able to have a discussion on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we can now move to our next speaker. And we've got 10 minutes left, so we hope that the audience is going to be able to stay a bit longer so you can participate to the full discussion. We got two very good speakers to follow, so we really hope that you can stay on board a bit longer. So let's start with the next speakers, which is Dr. Benizet Lanimachon, senior lecturer at the Center for Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ilorin, Nigeria, who will talk to us about the involvement of security sector actors in the management of the pandemic in Nigeria and trends for reforming. Thank you very much. Dr. Bemisola? Seems like there are some internet connection issues.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My presentation will revolve around the challenges of military reform during COVID-19 and after. And I consider the COVID-19 as, nudging us towards doing a reality check, and it provides us an opportunity for agenda setting in the area of security sector reform. So my presentation, I have about 12 slides there. I will skip some of these because some of the issues have been mentioned in previous presentations by speakers. But I will act on the fact that COVID-19 offers, it serves as a reminder and an opportunity for us, for stakeholders in the security sector. And this is because of the fact that the conduct of both the administrators and the men on the streets have given us so much to worry about. But as a recap, or bringing us up to speed, I would like to share with us that we've made progress in the area of defense and security sector reforms in Nigeria, although we have no policy or a coherent agenda yet. Each government comes to initiate what it considers to be important. And unfortunately, none of this has been properly linked to the issue of accountability and transparency. And I think that is one major opportunity this pandemic offers us in making demands. So in 2015, the government came up with a committee to address the reform of the Nigerian Armed Forces. And that committee in 2016, Nigeria also became, moving forward, in 2016, Nigeria became a member of the Open Government Partnership. Then this was followed up by a national action plan to be implemented from 2017 to 2019. Also in 2018, the Ministry of Defense announced that it will review the Armed Forces Act in the coming year, that is 2019. But all of these have been undermined by constraints, and most of these are around the issue of opaqueness, corruption, and negative optics. I say negative optics based on the conduct or the misconduct actually of many of our security agencies, which has also come to the fore during COVID-19. They are not only doing this on the streets, they are also doing this on the social media by issuing threats to Nigerians or anybody who tried to caution them or to call out their high-handedness. I will mention just a few here. In Sapele, in Osun, in different parts of the country, we have records of direct attacks on Nigerians in the name of enforcement by military officers during COVID-19, and many of these have gone unaddressed. On the other hand, we've also had corporate gestures from the military, and we've seen them setting up facilities and also making personal sacrifice, because there has been an instruction that none of them should go on leave during this pandemic. But amidst all of this, we still have accountability gaps, and some of the emerging steps are what I have in my ninth slide. That one, the establishment of a protocol between the Presidential Task Force and COVID-19 and the National Human Rights Council to ensure accountability for the violation, in line with the statement of the President that all alleged human rights violations will be investigated and accountability brought to bear for them. I consider this as a ray of hope, and I consider it an opportunity for the civil society to intervene going forward after COVID-19. It's also good to note that the National Human Rights Council is reaching out to the Ministries of Police Affairs, Defense, and Interior for a monthly report of accountability steps taken by each of the law enforcement agents, which the Commission will also make public. Again, this is another basis for the civil society organizations in Nigeria to continuously ask questions about this report. In going forward, the areas of reform reminded by COVID-19, in my opinion, are largely around the issues of training and accountability. It's important to do more in training the Nigerian military in performing policing responsibilities, as this has become the reality they have to contend with. It's also important to train all our security agencies on how to differentiate policing in a conflict zone and policing in a disease zone. These are different, settings which require peculiar and tailored skills. It's also important for more to be done in the area of women's sensitivity, because we have many instances of abuses directed at women from Nasarawa across the country. The reports are all over the media and even on the social media. Now, what are the implications of misconduct for the military, state, and society? I argue here that this misconduct reinforces the notion that the military is still a violent or forceful enforcer of the state's rule. So we are yet to have a military that serves the public. The military still serves the interests of any government in power. It is also an instrument of distorted policing, which we experience, and that is why the poor and the rich will always encounter the state or experience the state in a different way, and especially the women and the vulnerable groups bearing the brunt of this. Again, this is an opportunity for us to prioritize the diagnosis and treatment of PTSD in order to prevent what I call a looming psychiatric problem within the men of this security agency. Their conduct is promoting the notion that Nigeria operates a two-faced democracy, with one aspect for the rich and another for the
restorative justice, who will talk to us about the important democratic control over the security sector. Honorable, over to you. Honorable, we can't hear you. Honorable, I believe you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Is that okay? Hello.
Yes.
May I proceed?
Thank
Is
you.
that okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll give a background of the Office of the Ombudsman in Kenya. And as you are aware, generally speaking about our security sector in Kenya and the reforms, we've had a very violent history in us. Our engagement with the security sector is concerned and the citizens in this country. And it has not been easy until we were able to pass the Constitution 2010. And upon passage of the Constitution, one of the things that we wanted in this country was to ensure that we have a citizen-friendly security sector. And that is why when we end the Kenya Police Forces, we're able to change it to the Kenya Police Service so that it is able to relate with the citizens and for the citizens to accept the fact that the services are there for them, not the police forces not to be trusted. So we started from a lack of trust and a lot of human rights violation. And in the Constitution, we ensured that there were oversight institutions that were established to be able to check the security sector and the executive. One of these institutions that was established, of course, is the Office of the Ombudsman. We also have the National Police Service Commission that takes care of the welfare of the police officers, because we realized that the police officers' welfare was not being taken into account. And therefore, even when they engage with the citizens, it was not on a friendly basis of the protector, but it was someone who is already disillusioned by their places of work. We also have IPOA, which is an independent police protection oversight authority, to ensure that if your rights have been violated by the police, then you can easily go to IPOA, which is a departmental institution and outside the police forces for them to be able to justice. Now, what is the engagement of the Office of the Ombudsman with the security sector, and what has been the impact of COVID-19? When COVID-19 happened, when the pandemic happened, let me confess there before, we didn't see the connection between public health and the security sector, because each of them used to exist in their own form. But when the pandemic came, then it became clear that a public health also is a security sector concern. Because then what government did was to introduce curfew, was to bring in quarantine, to quarantine the people who had come in, maybe travel from out of the country. There was an issue of isolation centers where we felt most of the people who are put in these isolation centers, their rights were not being observed. So they would come and complain to the Office of the Ombudsman, and we're able to engage the Ministry of Health and the security sector, because in enforcing the quarantine measures, you'd find that the police were violating the rights of the citizens. We were able to issue an advisory to the security sector and tell them, much as you're trying to enforce the regulations that you passed in the COVID-19 pandemic, then you must, the Constitution has not been suspended. The fundamental rights of the citizens have not been suspended. We need you to observe their rights, even as they go into quarantine centers or as they go into isolation, as you enforce the curfew, because there has been a curfew to look at to ensure that the rights of the citizens are contained or are maintained, even as we move on towards the COVID-19. But the actual link that has come between the Office of the Ombudsman and the security sector in terms of accountability, we find that there is a lot of money that has been taken away from other institutions, and it is being used for purposes of addressing the issues of the pandemic, the COVID-19. So we are trying to tell government and other organs of government that efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability must be observed even during these times of the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the security sector, because we find they have become the key players in ensuring that the citizens wear masks, the citizens are sanitized. When we come to the institutions like malls and other areas that the citizens must visit, then the police have been very strong in ensuring that there is compliance. And towards this, you find there are so many complaints that have come about. We've had quite a number of issues of police brutality that have been reported to us, and we work together with institutions, oversight institutions, as I've said, IPOA. We work with human rights, and human rights has even gone to court because there were evictions. Government decided to evict some citizens who were said to have been squatters in government land. This brought a lot of uproar in the country, because the question was, why would you wait until there is a pandemic for you to evict squatters, or so-called? Because we felt that this was not the right time, assuming that they were illegally on this land, it was not the right time for them to have done that. So we are collaborating with the Human Rights Commission to be able to ensure the rights of the citizens are taken care of. We also have situations where we've had a lot of abuse, gender-based violence, even in the homes, and you'll find that I don't know whether it's because of the isolation, I don't know whether it's because of the families being put together because there is no movement, the restriction on movement. You find a lot of matrimonial disputes, a lot of spouses are killing each other. So we've come up with the Gender Commission to see how we can ensure that we talk to people. We're able to do a lot of public awareness and build social cohesion with the Commission that promotes social cohesion and ensure that people are able to live together. Families can still maintain their dignity in spite of the constraints that we have during this situation. We, as the Office of the Ombudsman, felt that there is a lot that we need to do in terms of systemic investigations. Now you can look at the challenges that we posted. We are facing challenges in the Office of the Ombudsman when it comes to investigations, because of course there is restriction of movement. We are not able to reach the people as we should to be able to receive the complaints. The budgets have been cut, so government has taken most of the money and into the COVID-19 pandemic issues to be able to ensure that the medical staff are given the PPEs, they are given whatever equipment that they need to ensure that their situation is addressed. We've also had a challenge when it comes to receiving of complaints. Most people in our country, in Kenya, like visiting, physical visits into the Office of the Ombudsman to state their problems to us. As at now, we are not able to receive the citizens into the offices because of the restrictions on movement. There's a lockdown currently in the country, and we cannot visit most of the towns. So there is that challenge. Then when it comes to technology, digitization, it has become a challenge because most of the population are not able to access the online filing of complaints so that they're able to get to us. But we believe that this is a situation that is going to be rectified as we move forward. We also have a challenge in terms of access to justice, because some institutions like the judiciary went on lockdown until Monday this week, when they were able to open up a little bit for accessibility. So we've not had a judiciary being able to be accessed by members of the public. And there are so many complaints being filed with us that the judiciary, the cases are pending in court. Much as there is a pandemic, we should be able to access justice. You will note that under the Office of the Ombudsman, much as we deal with complaints on maladministration and abuse of office, we also have access to information. The citizens are entitled to information. We expected as the Office of the Ombudsman to ensure the citizens are able to get information from various institutions. In Kenya, we have the governance structure of counties. Counties are devolved systems, and we are supposed to ensure that counties also give information to the citizens. So this has also been a challenge because the Ombudsman is not located in each and every county. So the citizens accessing the Office of the Ombudsman also becomes a major challenge, because then they are not able to file their complaints. They are not able to physically visit the office as they wish to. So those are some of the things that we also engage government and inform them that it's important for us to be able to be decentralized and be able to have offices in the country, as many parts of the country as we can. When we come to the way forward, what we feel as the Office of the Ombudsman, in as far as the security sector is concerned, we believe that for us to be able to deliver as we should, then we should have an opportunity of conducting systemic investigations, be able to engage members of the public, be able to look at situations, complaints even before they arise. And there are some situations where you find in institutions, there is a system that has the problem, not necessarily the people, but the systems, the way it has been set. So we intend to conduct a lot of systemic investigations to be able to address issues of governance, to address issues of efficiency, and to effectiveness as far as institutions are concerned in the course of our oversight of the institutions. We also intend to do public interest litigation, because we feel that there are factors that affect the public and they don't have the capacity or the status quo to be able to get to court. So we intend to do a lot of public interest litigation in as far as the security sector is concerned. And then we also intend to issue advisory opinions. And in advisory opinions, we work a lot with the Ministry of Defense, because in the Ministry of Defense, we also receive complaints against the Ministry of Defense. We have been approaching the Ministry of Defense to establish a military ombudsman, because I've visited South Africa, we visited various Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in these countries, we've found a military ombudsman. A military ombudsman is able to receive the complaints of the officers who work within the Ministry of Defense, and they are dealt with in the first instance by the military ombudsman. So we've been engaging our cabinet secretary and the principal secretary and appealing to them that it is important they have a proper complaints management system, so that their complaints should not be just brought to the ombudsman, but they can be settled within the military ombudsman if we are able to agree that they should set up a military ombudsman's office. So in as far as the Ministry of Defense is concerned, we want to ensure that we can set up a military ombudsman who will be able to deal with the other issues of complaints in collaboration with the ombudsman. We are also thinking of a lot about decentralization, which I've spoken to. We want to see how we can digitize the Office of the Ombudsman so that it is able to deliver services across the country. And we appreciate for sure the partnership we've had with Transparency International, because Transparency International has been able to come up and support most of the programs. We've worked together on access to information, so that now we, within the COVID-19, within the security sector, then we can support each other and be able to deliver for the people of this country. So we thank you, and that is my presentation.
Thank you very much, Honorable. That was very interesting. So now I'll let my colleague Salojin to lead the open discussion, and thank you to all of those that are still here.
All right, thank you very much, Camilla. I also want to thank all the speakers for their very resourceful presentations. And of course, one thing that came out very clearly for me is that there seems to be a number of deficits within our system, within the current SSGR that is being operated. And of course, we know too well that there were lots of delays from legislative response. And this in itself generated a number of opportunities for accountability to be shoved aside, and things were done with flagrant disregard to existing rules of law. So I will not take the risk of recapping all the presentations, but what I would do is that I will just quickly, because of our time, request that we just indicate by a show of hands. And we have 3 guiding questions. And of course, our presentations were also tailored in that direction. So please, for each of the questions, we'll take 2 comments. And for each of the comments, we'll give 30 seconds so that we can get off this platform in another 10 minutes max. So if you want to make any quick intervention, I would suggest that you just indicate by a show of hands. And of course, I will just quickly recognize you. Of course, okay, first I have the hand of Moses Oluwaseyi. Moses Oluwaseyi, you have the floor, and please, you have 30 seconds. I reserve the right to mute you if you take beyond that time. And of course, that will be followed by Sophie Stevens. And so Moses, you have the floor, please.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hello? Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Moses, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. First, to appreciate CISLAC for this wonderful initiative.
We can hear you loud and clear, please go ahead.
All right, first to appreciate CISLAC for this initiative, and as well, the 3 speakers have been very awesome. However, my quick intervention will be this. I observe that often than not, even when we engage security agencies, and especially in the area of this pandemic, I think there's often this lacuna in the terms of effective communication to what is often required from the citizens. And I think if the citizens are abreast with adequate information, it will also help in reducing the rate of violations of their rights from security agencies. So I would like to say that it's important we begin to also engage from that aspect, because when we begin to say we want to engage the justice system after a right has been violated, we could also begin to look at it from the preventive aspect of it, and I think that will help us go a long way. And my second intervention would also be that as much as it is not a major reason or justifiable reasons, but it's also important that we look at it in this direction. And what I mean in essence is to say that often than not, the adequate benefits and the welfareism of the security officers are often not even dispatched to them. So often than not, you find that there is this level of transfer of aggression on citizens and on civilians. So as much as I say that it is not a justifiable reason for you to bully others, but it is also important that we also begin to look at their necessities, that are their requirements, are they met? Because once one is treated adequately, you may want to say that the person also dispatch his responsibilities in the proper way that is required. This would be my quick interventions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Moses Oluwaseyi. That is very noted. I will take Sophie Stevens very quickly. Please, Sophie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Sophie. I'm a conflict advisor with the UK DFID, soon to be FCDO, for anyone who's followed that. My question is on SSR in Nigeria. Two quick questions. One is, what do the experts think about the trend towards community policing and state or regional security outfits? What do they see as the opportunities there or the challenges? And secondly, in terms of resources, what do you think is realistic to focus on in terms of SSR? We're looking at this issue very closely and how we can support the government and others in the COVID context, but conscious that revenue for the government is shrinking quite seriously because of the pandemic and oil price drops and everything. So will that make it difficult for the government to really make the reforms needed at this time? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie. I do not see any additional hand, so I would pass the baton back to the speakers and probably give them 1 minute each to respond to these questions, and probably also give their own closing remarks so that at least we can wrap up the session. So let me begin with Dr. Annie Marshall, because 2 questions are related to Nigeria. You probably might just want to take the first shot in responding to these. And please, if you have more urgent questions, please use the chat room to just drop your question, and somebody will be there to attend to you. Dr. Annie Marshall, please, I will pass the ball over to you.
Hello. Hello, am I on?
Yeah. Louder.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Sophie. Quickly, the drift towards community policing by communities in Nigeria is a reflection of the failure of government to police and the loss of confidence in state security apparatus across the country. In terms of resources needed, I think in the immediate, what we need to address is the misconduct of security agents. And that is where I think training comes in, or capacity building, to ensure that even if they don't have all the arms they need or the ammunition they need, they don't constitute threats to civil liberties of the citizens. And that is where we need to ensure that we do more, we give more resources towards training so that they conduct themselves in manners that build the confidence of the public. I think in the immediate, that is what we need. Then secondary, or in the long term, we need to pay attention to all the infractions committed during COVID-19, document them on one hand, and on the other hand, all the promises and assurances given by the National Human Rights Commission, given by the President, should also be documented so that as we move out or as we exit COVID-19, we have concrete issues and evidences that will form the basis of engaging governments at different levels in the areas of legislation, in the area of human rights abuses, and all other similar areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Training and research. Yeah, thank you. And documentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, a number of questions are also rolling in the chat room, but of course we will just harvest them and of course respond to them after now. I will run over very quickly to Julian because of the research you actually highlighted has got similarities across the West African region, and I'm sure that some of the issues raised here might just be an interesting part that you also need to mention in your closing remarks. So Julian, I will just give you a minute to just quickly give us your thoughts on the questions and of course your final bits in this particular regard. Julian, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Salahuddin. Just to mention that I'm not particularly an expert on Nigeria. I predominantly focus on Mali and Niger. This being said, the research I mentioned during my presentation will provide with a collection of case studies, and that will include Nigeria. So I will just make sure that people who are interested just please send me a message and I will follow up with you and make sure that this report is made available to you. This being said, I would say that the trends we identified, and that includes also Nigeria, is that a lack of emphasis on certain trends related to anti-corruption and good governance that we've identified. When you look at the research, they reveal that this lack of emphasis on anti-corruption tend to impede the reforms that are being currently undertaken. So I'll make sure that everybody gets the report when it goes out. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let me go very quickly to Ernest. And of course, I would like to hear from Ernest what the role of the Parliament was in terms of oversight in providing accountability infrastructure during the pandemic and looking at potential opportunities. In a minute, I would just want to get your wrap-up thoughts on that. If Ernest is still in the room, I will pass the ball over to you, Ernest.
Right, thank you very much. I agree with the responses that have come in so far. And as a trainer myself, I believe that we have to emphasize on training, especially and for the military and then the police, training on how they can work together. So integrated kind of training that brings all the security agencies, including the civilians and CSOs together in how we manage the crisis of this nature. So, and how they can also engage community, because community engagement is very important. And as one of the questions mentioned, you know, if we educate the public and the citizens so much to the extent that they understand the implications of the virus, the disease, and how it can spread and affect people, you can elicit you can elicit compliance easily without using weapons and all that. And it shouldn't be that, I mean, all the time when you see the military, then they are coming to enforce restrictions. But if we see them coming and engaging the community, how do we mobilize the military, which is so efficient in supplying food, water, and all those things in the community? They begin to now see the security agencies as part of them. And if they have communication about how the virus spreads and all those things, then they also elicit without the downside of human rights violations and all that. I think that we need to focus in that regard.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernest. And finally,
I think you mentioned about parliamentary oversight.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I think if you look across most of the countries, and I'm in Ghana right now, so I know what is happening. In fact, Parliament has been very instrumental, even though we are in the election year, which also provides its own dynamics, because then politicians are, you know, trying to take advantage of the situation. And that is also a very dangerous kind of situation we are beginning to see, politicizing the COVID situation in most of these countries. So you see the situation becoming more dicey in countries that are having elections. And even though Parliament has played significant role, for the first time I've seen Parliament coming together to support the executive from both the minority and then the majority side. And it is the same thing we saw also with the Ebola crisis in those in Liberia and Sierra Leone, how they supported the executive to contain the situation. And when it comes to the management of this crisis, which is apolitical, you begin to see the political parties working together in Parliament. But as soon as they come out of Parliament, it's a different conversation altogether, and they send conflicting signals to the population and the citizens.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernest. And finally, I will go to Honorable Flores. Honorable Flores, you mentioned something that struck me, and you talked about the issue of citizen-friendly security sector that seemed to be a very good model. And of course, for me, this is a new normal. In a minute, are you able to just share very quickly what exactly has worked well that can actually be a model for other civil society organizations and states to actually learn from? What are the lessons that you probably might want to share with this new concept that is playing out in your own region? Honorable Flores, can you hear me?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Oh, okay, thank you. As I said before, we used to have a security sector, both in the military and the police forces, that the citizens used to fear. What used to guide our engagement with the police then was fear. But when we passed the constitution, we realized that it's good that the people are able to see the police service as a service that is there to serve them. So we brought in oversight institutions, the National Police Service Commission, that now not only educates the public on what they should expect from the police, but also the military to open it up for the people to understand what exactly to expect. And that when they have challenges, when they have issues, they must report. When there's a criminal act that has been done, then they should be able to approach the police service. And with the oversight institution, especially the National Police Service Commission, they have been able to get to the public. With the Independent Police Oversight Authority, they've been able to teach the public that you can come to us if the police are not doing the duties that they're supposed to do. So that is how we are trying to create accountability also with the police, and especially the ombudsman. We've been able to enter the military and tell them, can we please allow us to access you, so that we set up a complaint management system, but with a military ombudsman who is not just who is not an active military officer, but maybe a retired officer who the people are able to relate with. So we are trying to do that in Kenya. It is a challenge. It is not that it has worked 100%, but you can see the public now view the police from a different point of view. And it's better, it is a better environment when we are managing issues of the security sector, and with the training, with the education of the people, with the training of the police service, we're ensuring that the welfare is also taken care of. It gives us a better environment, even to receive complaints that are against the police officers. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Flores. I think we have really harvested quite a whole lot. And of course, I would not run the risk of doing another recap, but just to thank you very much, and of course, all participants for finding time to join us at this event. Now I will pass the ball over to my colleague in London, Camilla, to please take the floor and of course, tell us how we move from here. Camilla, it's over to you now.
Hi, sorry, it took me a while to unmute myself. So I'd like to, first of all, thank you everyone, to thank all the speakers. It was great to have you all on board. And second of all, I'd like to thank colleagues from CISLAC. I think it was a very good experience to co-host this event. And I think there has been some very interesting conversation. So I would suggest that colleagues in London, so myself and colleagues and Julian and colleague from CISLAC enter their emails in the chat so that everyone can contact us if they are interested in continuing this discussion with us. I saw that some of you already started doing it. So yes, I would just put in my email right now, and I encourage colleagues in London and from CISLAC to do the same. Other than that, thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great experience, and just give us a couple of minutes before you disconnect to enter our emails. Thank you again. And of course, thank you to all for attending this event and for staying a bit longer. It was a very good discussion.
Hello? Hello?